Hello, and welcome to Sleepy History. Now settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let the worries of your day dissolve as we travel back through the mists of time. We journey to an age of marble and olive groves of gods and philosophers, to the final hours of a man who sought to understand what it truly means to live and how one might face the ultimate silence. I am always curious where in the world and at what time you are joining me tonight. So, I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. But for now, allow your eyelids to grow heavy, your muscles to soften, and your breath to deepen as we step into the quiet solitude of a prison cell, where a great mind is preparing for a journey he did not choose, but accepted with profound serenity. The day is fading, drawing to a close in the city of Athens, 399 BC, within the rough-hewn stone walls of a prison cell. A man sits on a low wooden bench. His name is Socrates. The heavy iron shackles that bound his legs for so long have just been removed, leaving a faint, chafed mark on his ankles. He reaches down, his fingers calloused and strong, and begins to gently massage his shins, coaxing the circulation back into limbs stiffened by confinement. Feel the warmth returning, a slow, gentle thrumming beneath the skin, releasing the day's tension, easing the memory of constraint. The last rays of the setting sun, a deep, bruised purple, filter through the narrow, unbarred window, painting the opposite wall in shifting hues of violet and gray. Outside, the mighty Acropolis, now a distant, majestic silhouette, seems to hold its breath. Inside, the air is still, thick with the scent of damp stone and a faint, sweet earthiness. There is no tremor of fear in this man, no restless anxiety. Instead, a profound quiet settles over him, as if he is preparing not for an end, but for an eagerly anticipated journey, a long-awaited departure. He watches the dust motes dance in the fading light, each particle a tiny, silent world suspended in the vast, indifferent air, before settling back into the quiet stillness of the floor. But the journey of this man did not begin in a prison cell. It began much earlier, in the bustling heart of Athens, amidst the workshops and the everyday clamor. He was born Aristocles, though he would later be known as Plato. But our focus tonight is on his teacher, Socrates, a man born of humble beginnings. His father, Socrates, was a stonemason, a craftsman whose hands knew the intimate language of marble and granite. And in his youth, Socrates too learned this ancient art. Imagine the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a hammer against a chisel, a steady hypnotic sound echoing through the workshop. The air is thick with fine white dust, swirling like a gentle mist in the shafts of sunlight that pierce the open doorway. He would stand before a raw, unyielding block of Parian marble, feeling its cool, smooth surface, its inherent strength. With each precise strike, each carefully guided cut, he wasn't simply imposing a shape. He was uncovering one, patiently removing the superfluous, chipping away the excess to reveal the form that lay dormant within. A goddess, a hero, a decorative frieze. The essence was already there, awaiting liberation from the rough exterior. This process, slow and deliberate, of reducing, of stripping away all that was not essential, would become the very essence of his later, profound work, a quiet, focused meditation on what truly remained when all falsehoods were discarded. As he moved into his middle years, through the golden age of Athens, Socrates became an unmistakable figure, a walking paradox amidst the city's elegance. He cut a striking, even comical, figure, a bald head, prominent, almost bulging eyes, a broad, somewhat portly belly, and an utterly unique habit that set him apart from every other citizen. He walked barefoot, always, through the scorching summer heat, over the cool, damp stones of winter, his feet, calloused and toughened, were his constant connection to the earth beneath him. He wore only one threadbare cloak, year-round a simple garment that seemed to defy the changing seasons. Picture him now, moving through the vibrant, sun-drenched agora, the central marketplace of Athens. The distant murmur of voices, the clatter of pottery, the rustle of fabrics, all blend into a soft, indistinct hum, a gentle white noise that forms the backdrop to his quiet passage. His bare soles press against the warm, ancient flagstones, feeling every subtle imperfection, every smooth worn patch, every grain of sand. Each step is deliberate, unhurried, a slow, grounding rhythm. This direct, unmediated contact with the solid, unyielding earth offered him a profound sense of stability, a rootedness that no worldly possession could ever provide. He moved with the slow, steady gait of a man entirely at peace with his own physical presence, a man whose feet knew the enduring strength of the ground beneath them, offering a quiet assurance in a world of constant change. The whispers of the market, the distant cries of vendors, the rhythmic clatter of a potter's wheel tween. These were the constant companions of Athenian life. But sometimes a different kind of sound, or rather, a different kind of silence, would draw a man away from the familiar hum of the city. For Socrates, such a moment arrived, not from within the bustling agora, but from the distant, sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus, from the very heart of the ancient world's wisdom, Delphi. It began with a friend, a man named Chaerephon, known for his ardent loyalty to Socrates, and perhaps for his impulsive nature. Chaerephon, caught in a moment of profound admiration for his teacher, had undertaken the long journey from Athens, winding his way through sun-drenched olive groves and across rocky terrain, his mind alight with a single, burning question. He sought the oracle of Apollo, the Pythia, the priestess whose words, though often veiled in riddles, were believed to be the voice of the god himself. Imagine Chaerephon's journey, the dusty roads giving way to mountain paths, the air growing cooler, thinner, as he ascended towards the sacred precinct. The scent of pine and wild herbs would have filled the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang that sometimes clung to the Delphic winds. He would have seen the majestic temple rising from the rock, its Doric columns gleaming under the intense Greek sun, or perhaps shrouded in the ethereal mists that often wreathed the peaks. He would have joined the queue of suppliants, men and women from every corner of the Hellenic world, each bearing their hopes, fears, and unanswered questions. The atmosphere would have been thick with anticipation, a hushed reverence punctuated by the rustle of robes and the soft murmur of prayers. Inside the temple, the air would have been heavy with the fragrance of burning laurel leaves and incense, a sweet, intoxicating cloud that seemed to blur the edges of reality. Finally, his turn would come. He would stand before the Pythia, perhaps a woman of advanced age, her eyes glazed, her body swaying gently as she sat on her tripod, inhaling the mysterious fumes that rose from a chasm in the earth. Her voice, when it came, would not have been her own. It would have been a low, guttural murmur, a series of indistinct sounds that would then be interpreted by the temple priests. Chaerephon, his heart pounding, would have posed his question, a simple, direct query that reverberated through the sacred space. Is there any man wiser than Socrates? The answer, when it came, was unequivocal, yet profoundly perplexing. The Pythia's voice, imbued with the god's authority, declared, "No man is wiser than Socrates." The words would have echoed in Chaerephon's ears, following him all the way back to Athens, where he eagerly recounted the divine pronouncement to his friend. Socrates, however, was not elated. He was, in fact, deeply troubled. His mind, accustomed to rigorous logic and clear definitions, found this declaration utterly bewildering. He knew with an absolute certainty that he knew nothing of great importance. He possessed no specialized knowledge, no grand theories, no claims to wisdom. How, then, could the god declare him the wisest? This divine riddle ignited a new quest within him, a journey not across physical landscapes, but through the intellectual terrain of Athens. Socrates felt compelled to test the oracle's words, to prove them wrong. He would seek out those who were widely reputed to be wise then, the politicians, the poets, the skilled craftsmen, and engage them in conversation, gently probing the depths of their understanding. Imagine him moving through the city, his bare feet silent on the warm cobblestones, his eyes always keen, observing the faces of those he approached. He would find a prominent statesman, a man lauded for his political acumen, perhaps sitting in the shade of a stoa, discussing affairs of the state. Socrates would approach, his manner disarmingly humble, his questions seemingly simple, almost naive. "Tell me, esteemed sir, what is justice? What truly constitutes a good leader?" The statesman, initially flattered by the attention, would confidently offer his definitions, his principles, and Socrates would listen, his head tilted slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then, with a series of gentle, incremental questions, like a sculptor carefully chipping away at excess stone, he would begin to reveal the inconsistencies, the unexamined assumptions, the fundamental gaps in the statesman's understanding. The grand pronouncements would begin to crumble, revealing a foundation of unexamined belief rather than true knowledge. The statesman, initially so certain, would find himself confused, perhaps even irritated, unable to defend his own claims to wisdom. He would then turn to the poets, men celebrated for their profound insights into the human condition, their ability to stir emotions and articulate beauty. "Tell me, noble poet," Socrates might inquire, "what is beauty? What is inspiration? When you write your magnificent verses, do you truly understand the divine truths they convey?" The poets, too, would speak eloquently of their craft, of their muse, of their innate understanding. But when pressed, when asked to articulate the rational basis for their insights, they would falter. They could produce beautiful words, but they could not explain the source of their wisdom, nor could they defend its logical coherence. They were like conduits, channeling something they did not fully comprehend. Finally, he would seek out the craftsmen, the shoemakers, the carpenters, the sculptors, the men who possessed tangible skills, who understood the intricacies of their materials and tools. "Tell me, master artisan," he would ask, "what is the nature of your craft? What makes a good shoe, a sturdy table, a lifelike statue?" Here Socrates found a different kind of wisdom. These men truly understood their specific domains. They knew how to work with leather, with wood, with marble. They possessed practical knowledge, precise skills. But when he extended his questions beyond their immediate craft, when he asked them about universal truths, about ethics or governance, they would often claim a similar expertise, extrapolating their specialized knowledge to areas where they had no true understanding. Through these endless conversations, these patient, persistent inquiries, a profound realization began to dawn upon Socrates. The oracle had not lied. The politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, in tree they all believed they knew much, when in fact they knew little, or only knew within a very narrow scope. Socrates, however, genuinely believed he knew nothing, and in this humble admission, in this profound awareness of his own ignorance lay his unique wisdom. "I know that I know nothing," he would often say, and it was this very recognition, this intellectual humility, that set him apart. This was not a cynical declaration of universal ignorance, but a liberating insight. It meant that he was always open to learning, always questioning, always seeking. He was not burdened by the weight of false knowledge, nor constrained by the rigid frameworks of unexamined beliefs. This ignorance was not a void, but an open space, a fertile ground for genuine inquiry. Imagine the relief that might accompany such a realization. The shedding of the heavy cloak of presumed wisdom, the freedom from having to pretend to know all the answers. It was like stepping out from a dense fog, where shapes are distorted and directions unclear, into a clearer, albeit still vast and mysterious, landscape. The mountain mists of Delphi, the swirling incense, the low, indistinct chants. They were all metaphors for the human condition, a constant state of partial understanding. And Socrates, in embracing his ignorance, found a path through the mist, not by claiming to see everything, but by acknowledging the limits of his sight. This quest, this intellectual pilgrimage, became his life's mission, and it was a mission born from a divine riddle, a gentle nudge from the gods themselves. It was a journey of uncovering, of stripping away the layers of pretense and assumption, leaving only the raw, unadorned questions. And in the quiet of his own mind, in the stillness that often accompanied his deep thought, he began to hear another kind of voice, a quiet companion that would guide him through the complexities of existence. In the bustling agora, where the clamor of commerce and the lively debates of citizens created a constant symphony of human activity, Socrates was a familiar, if somewhat peculiar figure. His broad, flat nose, his bulging eyes, his perpetually bare feet and worn cloak were unmistakable. He would move slowly through the crowds, sometimes engaging a young man in conversation, sometimes simply observing the ebb and flow of Athenian life. But occasionally something remarkable would happen. In the midst of all the movement and noise, Socrates would simply stop. He would halt mid-stride, his body suddenly still as if frozen in time. The world around him would continue its frantic dance, merchants haggling, chariots rumbling past, children playing, politicians gesticulating fundi. But Socrates would remain utterly motionless. His eyes, usually so animated, would take on a distant contemplative gaze, fixed on some unseen point, or perhaps simply turned inward. He would stand there sometimes for a few moments, sometimes for what seemed like an eternity, a living statue amidst the vibrant chaos. This peculiar habit was a manifestation of what he called his daimonion, his divine sign, or inner voice. It was not a voice in the conventional sense, not a booming command or a clear instruction. Instead, it was a subtle, internal resistance, a gentle nudge, a quiet warning that would arise within him whenever he was about to make a mistake, to take a wrong turn, or to say something that would be detrimental. It was always a negative sign, telling him not to do something, never to do something. It was his silent guardian, his internal compass, guiding him not by showing him the path, but by preventing him from straying onto dangerous ground. Imagine the scene, the sun high above, casting sharp shadows across the agora, the air thick with the scent of spices, sweat, and dust, the rhythmic sound of footsteps, a constant murmur of voices, the occasional bray of a donkey. And then, in the midst of it all, Socrates stands perfectly still. His rough tunic barely stirs in the breeze. His breath is shallow, almost imperceptible. He is not lost in thought in the way one might ponder a problem. He is listening, not to the external world, but to an internal echo, a faint whisper that only he can perceive. The wind might rustle through the leaves of a nearby plane tree, carrying with it the distant sound of waves crashing on the shore. These external sounds would merely form a backdrop to his internal stillness. He was listening for that subtle check, that quiet. No, that would arise from the depths of his being. It was a profound act of introspection, a complete withdrawal from the sensory input of the world, even as his physical body remained rooted in its midst. His students and acquaintances, accustomed to this strange phenomenon, would sometimes watch him with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. They understood that in these moments, Socrates was not merely daydreaming or distracted. He was engaged in a profound dialogue with something beyond the ordinary. It was a testament to his deep connection with his own inner self, or perhaps, as he believed, with a divine presence. These moments of stillness were not acts of will, but rather a surrender to an internal impulse. He would not force himself to stop. The daimonion simply made him stop. It was an involuntary pause, a sacred interruption in the flow of his day. And when the internal message had been received, when the subtle warning had been heeded, he would simply resume his walk, his conversation, his life, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The transition was seamless, a quiet return from a brief internal pilgrimage. Consider the power of such stillness in a world constantly demanding action, decision, and engagement. Socrates, with his daimonion, offered a different model of being Sornwin one that emphasized listening, pausing, and reflecting before acting. It was a rejection of impulsive behavior, a cultivation of inner discernment. In a time when oracles and diviners were sought for external guidance, Socrates found his most reliable counsel within. This internal voice was not a source of creative inspiration or predictive foresight. It did not tell him what great deeds to perform or what profound truths to declare. Its wisdom lay in its restraint, its gentle prevention. It was a filter, guarding him against folly, against moral missteps, against actions that would betray his own deeply held principles. Imagine yourself in a similar state of deep calm, allowing the external sounds to recede, to become a distant, indistinct hum. Let the noise of the day fade, the pressures of your thoughts dissolve. Feel the quiet presence within you, a subtle awareness, a gentle guardian. This is the space where the daimonion resides, not as a voice, but as a feeling, a subtle intuition that guides you towards peace, towards stillness. In those moments, when Socrates stood like a statue, The wind might whisper through the agora, carrying the faint scent of baking bread or blooming jasmine. The sunlight might shift, painting new patterns on the ancient stones, but his focus remained inward, attuned to that delicate incorporeal signal. It was a profound act of grounding, a deep connection to an eternal truth, allowing the external world to simply exist around him without pulling him into its ceaseless currents. This stillness was a form of profound presence, an embodiment of mindfulness long before the term existed. It was a deliberate, yet effortless, act of drawing inward, creating a sanctuary of quiet within the bustling city. And in that quiet he found his truest guidance, a gentle, unwavering compass that pointed him away from error, towards the path of integrity and wisdom. He listened, and in listening he found a profound peace, a quiet strength that would sustain him through all of life's trials. The Peloponnesian War, a brutal and protracted conflict, cast a long dark shadow over Athens for decades. It was a time of immense hardship, of sieges, battles, and devastating plagues. Even Socrates, the philosopher of the agora, was not exempt from its demands. He served as a hoplite, a heavy-armed infantryman, fighting for his city. He was known for his courage and resilience on the battlefield, saving the lives of companions, enduring the harsh conditions of military campaigns with remarkable fortitude. One winter, during the siege of Potidæa, a particularly bitter cold descended upon the region. The Spartan and Athenian armies were locked in a stalemate, enduring the elements as much as they fought each other. The nights were long and frigid, the ground frozen solid, and the air was thick with the threat of frostbite and hypothermia. Imagine the scene, a desolate landscape, scarred by war, now blanketed in a pristine, yet unforgiving layer of snow. The campfires, which had offered meager warmth and flickering light, would have slowly died down as the night wore on, leaving only embers and wisps of smoke curling into the biting air. Soldiers huddled together for warmth, their breath misting in the frigid darkness, would have been shivering uncontrollably, their minds fixated on the promise of dawn and a return to some semblance of warmth. But in the midst of this scene of collective misery, one figure stood apart, Socrates. He was not huddled by a dying fire. He was not seeking shelter from the biting wind. Instead, he stood perfectly still in the open air, barefoot amidst the falling snow. His worn cloak offered little protection against the intense cold, yet he remained motionless, like a statue carved from ice. The snow would have drifted down silently, steadily accumulating on his head, his shoulders, his cloak, turning him into a ghostly white figure. His breath, visible as white plumes in the frigid air, would have been slow, deep, and utterly steady, a testament to his remarkable self-control. His eyes, though fixed on no particular object, would have held an intense inward gaze, as if he were peering into the very depths of his own being, or perhaps into the heart of a profound philosophical question. He stood there not for an hour or two, but for an entire day and night. 24 hours, completely motionless, his bare feet sinking into the icy snow, his body exposed to the relentless cold. The other soldiers, waking in the morning, would have observed him with a mixture of awe, bewilderment, and a touch of fear. They would have whispered amongst themselves, speculating on his extraordinary endurance, his almost superhuman ability to transcend physical discomfort. Some might have approached him, trying to ascertain if he was alive. If he was well, he would have acknowledged their presence with a calm, distant look, but he would not move. What was he doing in those long hours of frozen stillness? He was thinking. He was pondering a problem, a philosophical question that had seized his mind with such intensity that the external world, with all its discomforts and demands, simply ceased to exist for him. The cold, the hunger, the fatigue, all dissolved into insignificance, overshadowed by the burning intensity of his internal inquiry. This was not an act of stoic defiance against the elements, but a profound immersion in thought. The extreme external conditions, rather than distracting him, seemed to sharpen his focus, to strip away all superficiality, leaving only the essential core of his mind engaged with the problem at hand. The cold became a catalyst for deeper concentration, a physical challenge that solidified his mental resolve. Imagine the quiet of that snowy landscape, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible sound of snowflakes landing on the frozen ground, on his cloak, on his eyelashes. The distant howls of wolves, perhaps, or the mournful cry of an owl. These sounds would merge into a vast, encompassing silence, a perfect backdrop for profound introspection. His body, though enduring extreme cold, would have entered a state of profound calm, a kind of meditative trance where pain and discomfort were transcended by the sheer power of his focused mind. This anecdote, recorded by his students, speaks volumes about Socrates' unique approach to life and philosophy. For him, the pursuit of truth was not confined to the warm discussions of the agora. It was a total commitment, demanding every fiber of his being, capable of overriding even the most fundamental human needs for warmth and comfort. He demonstrated that true strength lay not in physical prowess alone, but in an unshakable inner resolve, a mind so disciplined it could ignore the body's loudest protests. Let the image of the falling snow soothe your mind, each flake a tiny silent reminder of the quiet beauty of the world. Feel the stillness that Socrates embodied, a stillness born not of inaction, but of profound, unwavering focus. Allow your own body to relax, to grow heavy, to sink deeper into the embrace of your resting place. Just as Socrates found a deep, internal warmth in the midst of the freezing cold through the power of his mind, allow your own consciousness to find a tranquil focus, a gentle absorption that leads you away from the day's concerns. The white breath of Socrates in the cold air, a visible manifestation of his steady life force, becomes a symbol of quiet endurance. The snow-covered landscape, hushed and serene, invites a similar quietude within you. Let the gentle, repetitive rhythm of the falling snow guide your thoughts, dissolving the edges of your awareness, leading you into a state of deep calm. The world outside may be cold and demanding, but within you can cultivate a sanctuary of stillness, a warmth of profound peace. Your breath, like Socrates, becomes slow and steady, a gentle rhythm that lulls you deeper, deeper into the soft embrace of sleep. The sun climbed higher, warming the stones of the agora, then softening as it filtered through the broad leaves of the plane trees along the Ilissus River. It was here, in the quiet shade, that Socrates often found his classroom. Not a formal academy with rows of benches and lecturing masters, but a patch of grass by the flowing water, a sun-dappled courtyard, or simply a shaded corner of the bustling marketplace. The cicadas, those tireless musicians of the Athenian summer, would begin their rhythmic chorus, a sound that could be both insistent and deeply soothing, a natural drone beneath the soft murmur of human voices. He would sit, perhaps cross-legged on the cool earth, his worn cloak settling around him like the dust of ages. Young men, drawn by curiosity, by reputation, or by the sheer magnetic force of his presence, would gather around. They were often the sons of noble families, their minds keen, their spirits eager, but sometimes also artisans, merchants, or even seasoned politicians. Socrates treated them all with the same unvarnished respect, not as pupils to be filled with knowledge, but as fellow travelers on a shared journey. His method was not to declaim, not to deliver polished speeches or complex theories. Instead, he would begin with a simple question seemingly innocuous, perhaps about courage or piety or justice. "What is courage?" he might ask, his eyes, though prominent, holding a gentle, searching gaze. "Is it simply facing danger without fear?" A young man, perhaps Laches or Nicias, would offer a confident definition, a ready-made answer absorbed from the prevailing wisdom of their time. And Socrates would listen, his head tilted slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Then the gentle unraveling would begin. Like a skilled weaver, he would take the thread of their definition and meticulously examine it, turning it over and over. He would ask for examples, for clarifications, for implications. So if a madman rushes into battle, is that courage? Or, if a general sends his troops to certain death, knowing it is for the greater good, is that courage even if he himself is afraid? Each question was not a challenge designed to humiliate, but a delicate probe seeking the edges of understanding, the hidden assumptions. The conversation would flow, a gentle current mirroring the river beside them. There was a rhythm to it, like the slow, deliberate untying of a complex knot. Each question was a careful tug, each answer a momentary tightening, followed by another thoughtful loosening. The initial confidence of his interlocutors would often begin to waver, their firm definitions dissolving like mist in the morning sun. They would find themselves contradicting their own earlier statements, discovering inconsistencies they had never perceived. This was his maieutic method, the art of intellectual midwifery. He saw himself not as one who implanted knowledge, but as one who helped others give birth to their own thoughts, to bring forth the truth that lay dormant within them. He believed that knowledge was not something to be poured into an empty vessel, but something to be drawn out, like water from a deep well. And often, the first step in this birth process was the uncomfortable realization of ignorance. "I thought I knew what justice was," a young man might confess, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But now I am utterly perplexed." This perplexity, this state of aporia was precisely the goal. It was not a defeat, but a beginning. It was the moment when the mind, cleared of its superficial certainties, became receptive to genuine inquiry. The shade of the plane tree deepened, the cicadas hummed on, and the river flowed, carrying away the dust of unquestioned assumptions. There was no rush, no pressure to arrive at a final answer, only the shared pursuit, the quiet companionship in the face of profound questions. The process itself was the reward, the mindful act of dismantling, of purifying, of searching for the form within the formless. It was a gentle, almost meditative dance of minds, a soft murmur of inquiry that invited not contention, but a deep, quiet introspection. The air was still, heavy with the scent of sun-warmed earth and distant blossoms, and the only sound was the patient unfolding of thought, a soft, rhythmic untying of threads that had long been tangled. The air in the Heliaea, the great public court of Athens, was thick with the scent of anticipation, of nervous energy, and the faint, acrid smell of sweat. It was the spring of 399 BC, a day that would forever echo through history. Thousands of citizens, a jury of 501 men, packed the vast hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and weariness. The charges against Socrates were grave, impiety towards the gods of the city and corrupting the youth. Death was a possible, even likely, outcome. The din of the crowd was a constant restless hum, a shifting sea of voices and rustling cloaks. But at the center of this storm, standing solitary and unbowed, was Socrates. He was an old man now, his familiar face with its broad nose and deep-set eyes, etched with the passage of time yet utterly serene. He wore his customary simple tunic, unadorned, unthreatening. Beside him, the water clock, the clepsydra, stood as a silent, relentless arbiter of time. Its steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip was the only constant sound, a soft counterpoint to the restless murmurs of the assembly. Each drop marked the relentless march towards a verdict, towards a fate that few men would face with such unflinching composure. His accusers had spoken, their voices impassioned, their arguments laced with fear and indignation. They painted him as a dangerous innovator, a subversive influence, a man who questioned the very foundations of Athenian society. He spoke of the gods he did not believe in, of the young men he led astray. The crowd had listened, swayed by rhetoric, by the anxieties of a city still reeling from defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Now it was his turn to speak. One might expect a man facing such a dire accusation to plead, to weep, to invoke the pity of the jury. Many defendants before him had brought their wives and children into the court, their tearful pleas a desperate attempt to sway the verdict. But Socrates did none of these things. He stood as he had always stood, a rock in a churning sea. His voice, when it came, was not raised in desperate supplication, nor was it filled with indignation. It was calm, measured, and conversational, the same voice he used in the agora under the plane trees, engaging in his daily dialogues. He spoke not to appeal to their emotions, but to their reason. He explained his life's mission, the divine command he believed he was fulfilling by questioning, by seeking truth. He spoke of his daimonion, the inner voice that always held him back from wrongdoing, never urging him forward, but always restraining. The jury shifted. Some listened intently. Others grew restless, their impatience a palpable force in the room. The water clock continued its soft, insistent drip. Socrates knew the conventions of the court, the expectations of a defendant. He knew that to refuse to beg, to refuse to grovel, was itself an act of defiance in their eyes. But he could not betray his own principles, his own understanding of what was right. To compromise his integrity, to abandon his life's work for the sake of a few more years, would be a far greater death than any the state could inflict. He spoke of being Athens' gadfly, a stinging insect meant to rouse the great, sluggish horse of the state from its complacency. He acknowledged that his questioning had made him unpopular, that it had exposed the ignorance of many who believed themselves wise. But he insisted that he had done so out of love for Athens, out of a genuine desire to improve its citizens, to help them care for their souls. There was a profound detachment in his demeanor, not coldness, but a steadfast refusal to be moved by the clamor, the fear, or the threat of death. He was not indifferent to his fate, but he was master of his own spirit. He presented his arguments with quiet dignity, with an unwavering commitment to the truth as he saw it, even if that truth was uncomfortable, even if it led to his own demise. He stood alone, a singular figure of reason and tranquility against the agitated tide of public opinion. The steady drip, drip, drip of the water clock filled the moments of silence between his measured words, a soothing, hypnotic rhythm that underscored the profound stillness at the heart of the storm. He was teaching them, even then, in his final public discourse, the power of quiet conviction, the strength found in an unshakable inner peace, a peace that remained undisturbed even as the world around him raged, a profound lesson in detachment. The heavy wooden door of the prison cell creaked shut, plunging Socrates back into the familiar gloom. The verdict had been rendered, guilty, and the sentence after a second vote, death. Yet, a strange reprieve had been granted. The sacred ship, to Delos, the very vessel that Theseus was said to have sailed to Crete, had not yet returned to Athens. During its voyage, no executions could take place. So for 30 days, Socrates was to remain in his cell, awaiting the white sails that would signal his end. The moon, when it rose, cast long, silvery bars across the rough stone floor of the cell. Through the small, high window, one could almost imagine the distant shimmer of the Aegean Sea. And from that distant sea, if one listened very closely, a faint, rhythmic sound could be heard, the gentle, ceaseless lapping of waves against the shore. It was the sound of the world outside, a world that continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the fate of one old man. His friends visited him daily, their faces etched with grief and despair. Crito, his oldest and most devoted friend, came with a desperate plan. Everything was arranged, guards bribed, a safe passage secured to Thessaly, a place where Socrates could live out his remaining years in peace. The escape was not only possible but imminent. The money was ready, the network in place. All Socrates had to do was say yes. Crito pleaded with him, his voice thick with emotion. Think of your children, Socrates. Think of your friends. You are abandoning us, abandoning your duties. He painted a vivid picture of a quiet life in exile, of continued philosophical discourse, of avoiding an unjust death. The moonlight, now brighter, illuminated Crito's tear. Streaked face, a stark contrast to Socrates' calm demeanor. Socrates listened patiently, his gaze steady, his breathing slow and even. He allowed Crito to finish, absorbing every word, every heartfelt plea. Then he began to speak, not with anger or impatience, but with the gentle, reasoned voice that had defined his life. He explained his reasoning, his unwavering commitment to the laws of Athens. Even those that condemned him to escape, he argued, would be to betray the very principles he had taught, to undermine the social contract, to render all his life's work a hypocrisy. Should one never do wrong in return for wrong, nor do ill to any man, no matter what he may have done to you? He asked Crito, leading him through the familiar steps of their shared philosophical journey. He reminded Crito of their long-held belief that it is never right to do injustice, to break the laws of the city that had nurtured him, that had given him life and education, would be an act of injustice against the very foundation of his existence. The hours passed slowly in the cell, marked only by the shifting moonlight and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. Sometimes, in the quiet solitude of the night, a dream might visit him. Perhaps a vision of a white-clad woman appearing before him, saying, "Socrates, on the 3rd day you will reach fertile Phthia." It was a line from Homer, a prophecy of a journey, a promise of arrival. He took it as a sign, a confirmation of his path, his acceptance of what was to come. There was a profound sense of peace in this acceptance, a quiet surrender not to despair but to destiny. The waiting period, which for others would be a torment of anxiety, became for him a final period of reflection, of conversation, of preparing his soul for its ultimate journey. The distant sound of waves, which might have driven others to frantic worry about the ship's return, became a soothing lullaby, a sound of inevitability, of the natural order of things. Each morning, as the first light crept into the cell, he would awaken with the same tranquil spirit. He knew the ship would come, he knew the end was approaching. But this knowledge brought not dread, but a quiet certainty, a deep, abiding calm. It was the calm of a man who had made his peace with the world, with his principles, and with the ultimate mystery of existence. The waiting was not a burden, but a final gift of time, a serene interval before the inevitable, a silent, almost meditative passage towards the horizon where the white sails would finally appear, bringing not an end, but a transition. His breathing remained soft and steady, a gentle rhythm in the quiet stillness of the prison cell, reflecting the profound peace within, a quiet acceptance of the journey that lay ahead. The last day dawned, a gentle Athenian spring morning, but for Socrates it was the final chapter of an extraordinary life. The sun, already climbing, cast long soft shadows across the rough stone floor of his cell, painting the familiar space in hues of amber and gold. His friends had gathered, their faces etched with grief, their voices hushed, a heavy silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city slowly waking. But Socrates himself remained serene, a tranquil island in a sea of sorrow. He had bathed, a ritual of purification and preparation, his body now clean and refreshed, clothed in a simple, fresh white robe. This final act of self-care was not for the living, but for the journey ahead, a quiet testament to his belief in the immortality of the soul. He sat among them, his gaze calm, his hands resting lightly on his knees. The air was thick with unspoken farewells, with the weight of impending loss. Yet he spoke not of farewell but of transition, of a homecoming. He compared his impending death to the song of a swan. Swans, he explained, sing their most beautiful melodies not out of sorrow, but out of joy, for they sense their imminent return to the gods whose servants they are. And so too he believed did the philosopher approach death. It was not an ending to be feared, but a passage, a release, a return to a pure, more divine state of being. He spoke softly, his voice a low, steady current washing over their distress, gently redirecting their sorrow towards understanding. His words were like a lullaby for their troubled hearts, a soothing balm on their raw grief. He reminded them that the philosopher's life was a constant practice, a preparation for this very moment. To philosophize, he had always said, was to learn how to die, not in a morbid sense, but in the sense of detaching oneself from the transient desires of the body, from the fleeting illusions of the material world, and turning instead towards the eternal truths of the soul. Death, then, was not an annihilation, but a liberation, a final, complete separation of the soul from the body's confines, allowing it to soar, unburdened, to the realm of pure forms. He looked at Crito, at Phaedo, at all the young men who had followed his strange, questioning path. Their eyes were red-rimmed, their shoulders slumped, but as he spoke, a faint glimmer of peace began to replace the anguish in their gaze. He spoke of the soul as something divine, something distinct from the perishable flesh, something that journeyed to a place of judgment, and for the virtuous, to a place of eternal bliss. The fear of death, he suggested, stemmed from a misunderstanding, a clinging to what is temporary, a forgetting of what is truly eternal within us. The golden light of the late afternoon sun streamed through the small window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, transforming the humble cell into a space of quiet contemplation, almost sacred. The world outside, with its bustling agora, its political intrigues, its daily clamor, seemed impossibly distant, irrelevant. Here, in this small room surrounded by his dearest friends, Socrates was performing his final, and perhaps most profound, act of teaching. He was not just facing death, he was embracing it, demonstrating with every calm breath, every gentle word, the very philosophy he had lived. His voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority, an unshakable conviction that resonated deep within their hearts. He was not comforting them with empty platitudes, but with the logical, reasoned conclusions of a lifetime spent in rigorous inquiry. He was showing them that true wisdom lay not in accumulating knowledge, but in understanding the true nature of existence, in aligning oneself with the cosmic order, even in the face of the ultimate unknown. His presence was so powerful, so utterly devoid of fear, that it created a strange, almost hypnotic calm in the room. The friends, though still deeply saddened, found themselves drawn into his tranquility, their own anxieties beginning to recede, replaced by a profound sense of awe and a quiet, nascent understanding. He spoke of the soul's journey, a voyage across a vast, unseen sea, guided by its own virtues and vices. For those who had lived justly, who had pursued wisdom and truth, the journey would be smooth, leading to a radiant shore. For others, less fortunate, it would be fraught with peril. But for all, there was a destination. This was not a final goodbye, but a temporary parting, a promise of reunion in a realm beyond the shadows of this world. His words were a soothing melody, an ancient hymn sung under the golden Athenian sky, guiding not just his friends, but perhaps even himself, towards a peaceful acceptance of the inevitable. The air grew still, heavy with the weight of profound meaning, as if the very walls of the cell were listening, absorbing the wisdom of his final, beautiful song. The sun continued its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, as if nature itself was preparing for a grand, solemn farewell. A quiet breeze rustled through the olive trees outside, carrying with it the scent of spring flowers, a gentle reminder of life's perpetual cycle. Inside the cell, the golden light softened, mellowing into a warm, diffused glow. Socrates, having concluded his gentle discourse, simply waited, his eyes peaceful, his breathing even. He had offered his friends not just comfort, but a final, powerful lesson in courage, in wisdom, in the art of living, and ultimately the art of dying. The silence that followed was not empty, but rich with the echoes of his words, a profound stillness that invited reflection, even in the midst of sorrow. Then the executioner arrived, a somber figure carrying the cup. It was a simple vessel, holding the dark, bitter liquid of hemlock. Socrates took the cup from the man, his hands steady, his gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no tremor, only a calm acceptance. He held the cup aloft for a moment, a silent offering to the gods, a final libation before his journey. His friends watched, transfixed, their breath caught in their throats, tears silently streaming down their faces. but he merely smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that seemed to say, "Do not weep for me." He drank the poison in one smooth, unhurried motion, emptying the cup completely. The liquid, cold and foreign, flowed down his throat, a final taste of the earthly realm. Then, as instructed, he began to walk around the cell, slowly, deliberately. His steps were measured, his posture upright, as if he were merely taking a stroll in the agora. He walked for a time, his bare feet padding softly on the rough stone, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the room. The poison began its work slowly, subtly, like a spreading chill. He continued to walk, each step a testament to his control, his unwavering resolve. But gradually, imperceptibly at first, his legs began to feel heavy. A dull ache began to spread upwards from his feet, a growing numbness that crept through his calves, then his thighs. The sensation was not painful but profound, a gradual detachment. His legs felt like lead, unresponsive, no longer entirely his own. The blood in his veins seemed to slow, to grow thick, carrying a profound coldness. He could feel the life retreating, drawing inward, like the tide receding from the shore. He lay down on the cot as the executioner instructed, his body surrendering to the inevitable. The numbness continued its ascent, a quiet wave washing over him, stealing away sensation, one limb at a time. His feet grew cold, then his ankles, then his knees. He could no longer feel them, though he could still see them. The cold spread, a peaceful, enveloping stillness. His friends gathered around him, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on his. He pulled his robe up, covering his face, a final act of modesty, a gesture of privacy in his last moments. A profound quiet descended upon the cell, broken only by the ragged breaths and stifled sobs of his friends. The world outside seemed to fade, its sounds muffled, distant. The only reality was the gradual, peaceful surrender of his body. The numbness reached his waist, then his chest. His breathing grew shallower, his pulse fainter. It was a slow, gentle dissolution, a melting away of the physical form. The sensation was not of pain, but of a deep, pervasive calm, a release from all earthly burdens. His mind, however, remained clear, sharp, fully present. Then, just before his last breath, he uncovered his face, his eyes open, looking at Crito. His voice, though faint, was clear, carrying his final, enigmatic words. "Crito," he whispered, "we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Please, don't forget to pay the debt. Asclepius, the god of healing." A rooster, a traditional offering of gratitude for recovery from illness. Was he implying that life itself was an illness, and death the cure? Or simply fulfilling a mundane promise, even in his final moments, a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice and duty? The meaning was left open, a final riddle, a last spark of his ever-questioning mind. Crito nodded, his face contorted with grief, promising to fulfill the request. Socrates covered his face again. A few more shallow breaths, a final, almost imperceptible sigh. Then, a profound stillness. His body lay motionless, utterly at peace. The executioner gently touched his feet, then his legs, finding them stiff and cold. The stillness spread, encompassing his entire form. He was gone. The wisest man at Athens, the gentle gadfly, the barefoot walker, had finally completed his journey. The silence that followed was immense, heavy with the weight of his absence. The friends sat in stunned grief, their tears now flowing freely, openly. The sun had set, and the cell was plunged into a soft twilight, the purple hues of dusk painting the walls. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of stone and dust, a timeless aroma. The sounds of the city had faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves outside, the ancient eternal whispers of the night. Socrates wrote nothing, not a single word. No scrolls filled with his doctrines, no treatises outlining his theories. His philosophy was not etched in stone or inked on papyrus, but carved into the minds and hearts of those who encountered him. It lived in the questions he asked, in the dialogues he provoked, in the restless pursuit of truth he ignited in others. He was a voice, a presence, a living embodiment of inquiry. And though his physical voice was now silent, his unwritten philosophy began to echo, reverberating through the ages, shaping the very foundations of Western thought. Athens itself, the city he loved and challenged, the city that condemned him, would rise and fall, its grand buildings turning to ruins, then rebuilt, then ruined again. The magnificent Parthenon, standing proud on the Acropolis, would witness centuries of change, of empires rising and crumbling. The bustling agora, where he had spent his days engaging citizens in conversation, would eventually become a field of rubble, then a quiet archaeological site. The olive trees would continue to grow, their gnarled branches reaching towards the sky, indifferent to the passage of human history. The wind, an ancient, tireless traveler, would sweep through the ruins of the agora, rustling through dry grasses, whispering past broken columns. It would carry the dust of centuries, the memories of countless voices, of laughter and tears, of debates and declarations. But amidst all these echoes, the most profound sound would be the silence. The silence that followed the end of his dialogues, the silence that enveloped his death, the silence that now surrounds his legacy. This silence is not an emptiness, but a vast, resonant space. It is the canvas upon which his students, especially Plato, would paint their own philosophies, forever inspired by his methods, his courage, his relentless pursuit of truth. His unwritten words became the seeds of countless future thoughts, sprouting in the minds of generations of philosophers, artists, and scientists. They are the invisible threads that weave through the fabric of our civilization, guiding us to question, to examine, to never accept easy answers. Now, as the night deepens, and the world outside grows quiet, let the echoes of his unwritten philosophy fade into the vast expanse of the cosmos. Let the wind carry away any lingering thoughts, any remaining worries. The dialogue has ended. The questions have been asked, and the answers, perhaps, lie in the peace that now settles upon you. The journey of the mind, like the journey of the soul, finds its deepest rest in stillness. Feel the quiet embrace of the night, the gentle rhythm of your own breath, as everything around you softens, slows and dissolves into the eternal comforting silence. Let your mind drift, light and unburdened, like a feather on the wind, sinking deeper and deeper into the quietude, into the profound, peaceful void of sleep.